So wow, a vlog that isn't necessarily about a 3DS game or about WoW. That doesn't happen very often, and actually we are going back to my roots here because today's vlog is actually about a franchise near and dear to my heart. You guys know that because I've been doing Let's Plays of Final Fantasy probably the longest on the channel. And so with that, people have asked me my thoughts on 15 and have asked, am I worried about it? Do I think it's going to be a problem title like 13 was? And again, I'm not one of those people that thinks that 13 was a problem title. I think it was fine. I think the story was there and the story did what it needed to do. And I'm sorry that people didn't like some of the features in it, but well, a lot of Final Fantasy games have things you like and things you don't like. And you can whine and complain about them all you want, but that's the way they are. I know people who like 8. I'm not necessarily in that camp, but I can understand why they do. I know people that absolutely adore 7 and hate 13, which I still find to be a weird double standard. Especially since the reason they like it is because of Cloud Strife, and I've said it before, I'll say it again. Lightning is a female Cloud Strife. So I don't see where your problem is. That being said, I'm not here to poke fun at the various Final Fantasy fans. I'm not. Because, hey, you play Final Fantasy, good on you. I want this franchise to be able to last. This is more importantly about trying to establish the lore of Final Fantasy XV. Now, I'm going to go delve a little bit into the history here for those who don't know it. 15's conception was actually to be a game alongside 13 called Versus 13. And so at that point, or to that end, it was supposed to be part of the Fabula Nova Crystallis kind of thing, or series of games, I guess, for lack of a better word, and now it's no longer part of that. But with that, we kept getting trailers, and we kept seeing like little tidbits here and there that were intriguing, but didn't really tell us a whole lot about the world that 15 was based in, or the lore behind it, kind of keeping us quiet the way that 13 did. And, well, that kind of blew up in 13's face, and even I'll admit that. I mean, the lore of 13's world, Cocoon and Pulse, is very vague, and unless you're willing to go and read a bunch of dialogue in it, or a dialogue in the menus, then you're not going to know it. And frankly, I like reading quests in WoW. I occasionally like reading the books inside of MMOs, but I'll admit, I'm not one of the people that did that. So for me, 13's story, while vague, still had some points and some meaningful moments that anybody can get behind, and so I still stand behind it. 15 has the same thing, though. We don't necessarily know a whole lot about the lore of the world, because each time it's a new world, a new lore, a new set of characters to get to know. And that's where this movie, Kingsglaive, comes in. So Kingsglaive is it's a prequel, but it's not a prequel. It's a prequel, but it's set in parallel to some of the events that are going to happen in 15. Now, a lot of people will take this as like a movie vlog where I'm going to spoil it heavily and things like that. I'm actually going to try and leave it as vague as I can because, frankly, I mean, I'm a diehard Final Fantasy fan, and I got stuff out of it, and I got enough to be able to have a good standing when it comes to 15's lore. But I want people to be able to watch this and see it for what I see it to be, or whatever you're going to see it to be. And so I'm not going to spoil it heavily. But I will give my opinion on it. Just to give kind of a brief story synopsis kind of thing for it. The story follows, a lot of people were expecting this to follow the main character Noctis, I think that's his name, for 15, but it actually doesn't. It follows Nyx Ulrich, a member of the Kingsglaive. Specifically, Kingsglaive are kind of not a secret, but an elite guard assigned by the king of the Kingdom of Lucis, specifically to be able to wield magic and to be able to combat the threats that Lucis faces now against the Empire of Niflheim. And so we get to have a couple of covert missions and things like that, but most of the stuff features around this character Nyx and his relationship with members of the Kingsglaive, specifically one with and I can't remember his last name, but his name is Libertas, and how they're dealing with basically a war that they are losing. Like I said, Lucis and Niflheim are at war, but the way to look at this is like, I want to make a World War I, World War II comparison because that's really what it is. Niflheim is World War II Germany trying to take over Europe. And at least in that concept, where they're taking over kingdom after kingdom after kingdom. And the last kingdom that they haven't been able to take over is Lucis. And strongly because of the fact that while Niflheim utilizes technology, Lucis utilizes magic. In particular, they have a crystal that they can connect to and gain its power. And they've been using a magic barrier around the main city of Lucis, Insomnia, to keep the war from entering into the kingdom of Lucis. So at that point, the Kingsglaive go out and actually try and fight these skirmishes to try and slow down Niflheim. But it's a losing battle, because obviously Niflheim just continues to hammer at them, and Lucis just doesn't have the resources to go to full all-out war, especially since, I guess during a journey to a kingdom called Tenebrae, they actually got assaulted by Niflheim. The king was majorly injured, and also a lot of the guard that was there, as well as I think a majority of the royal family of Tenebrae, were lost in that attack. In fact, the only reference that we have to Tenebrae ever since then is the main female lead. I think her name is Luna Freya. I think that's how you say it. Some of the names are still kind of vague to me, because I want to make sure. I'm sure that they'll be in the game and will have importance there, but in the movie they're not necessarily featured. Again, it's centered around the Kingsglaive. So Luna Freya is now a captive of Niflheim, and they're using her as kind of a like a pawn to get a arranged marriage between her and Noctis to finally gain the territory of Lucis. And like I said, Lucis is fighting a losing battle here. They are losing territory every day, and the king can't afford to keep the crystal's power maintaining this barrier all the time. So at that point, he settles on making a truce, and through that, we start having a series of events that kind of set up into 15's main story, mostly centered around Nyx and his perspective, and the fact that the Kingsglaive, we find out, is mostly set up of not people who necessarily lived in Insomnia, but lived in the surrounding villages. And because this alliance basically says those are all Niflheim's territories, but Lucis maintains its own autonomy, they are looking at this and going, Lucis is abandoning where we live. Lucis is abandoning our hometowns. And so you get to see all of the soldiers of the Kingsglaive deal with this in a myriad of ways. A lot of it is anger, but a lot of it is just, okay, well, yeah, we can be angry about this, but this is for the greater good. And ultimately, Nyx does find out that this is for a greater good. But I'm not going to spoil that concept. That's probably about as far as I can go without spoiling it. And again, I want to be able to make sure you guys can get it. I got it through streaming, but I'm also getting a Blu-ray version of it because I did like this movie. I liked a lot of what it was trying to establish. I know, surprise, right? You didn't think that the Final Fantasy fan was not going to like it? Well, don't know what to tell you there. I like the premise of it, and the reason I do is because I was actually wary about having a movie come out, because the last movie that came out in Final Fantasy was Advent Children. And I'm not saying Advent Children was bad. I would say it's good, but it's not great. I actually think that a lot of the events don't necessarily add a whole lot of closure or make sense to where these characters were after that movie or after that game. Because a lot of them, we see them deal with internal struggles that they were dealing with in the game But in the game, they actually gained closure from those issues. In particular, I did not understand why Cloud took 10 steps backwards, where he was okay with the fact of where he was, and then all of a sudden, oh wait, we're still dealing with Eris dying. Whereas he's, at that point, at the end of the game, he's resolved it. He's okay with it. He made sure that Holy happened. And in a lot of cases, that to me feels like closure. And it feels like they shoehorned him into still regretting Eris's death. And to me, that's not a whole lot of character development. In fact, I would actually dare say that not a whole lot of character development happened with him. And, well, the story kind of centered around him. It centered around him and Denzel, and I would say to some extent Marlene, as well as some of the other characters like Tifa. But it is supposed to center around him, and we're supposed to get resolution for him, but we got that in the game. So at that point, I would actually say Advent Children is a good film. It's not great, but it falters in these regards. Kingsglaive, however, doesn't, which is weird because a lot of the assets that were going to be used in Advent Children were brought into Kingsglaive, and they work. I can honestly tell you that I think a couple of summons and a couple of magic spells that were supposed to make their way into Advent Children and made it into Kingsglaive, they work here because they establish the world that we're living in. And I love the world so far that we've seen from Kingsglaive. We're in a world that is very much reminiscent of Final Fantasy VI. In fact, I found it interesting that Niflheim actually refers to the technology as Magitech. And so I'm like, oh, wow. And there's a lot of nods to 6 and 7 and even a couple of others. So I'm very surprised with how they're establishing this story and how well it's working. So at this point, we don't have a whole lot of vague terms. Everything is still brought in, that was in, and I can agree with this. 13 had that shortcoming of bringing in concepts like Falsi, Lissi, and immediately assuming that you knew what those were. And you didn't. In a lot of cases, Jesse Cox and Spoonie have been right on that regard. Those were incredibly vague terms that didn't need to be in there. But 15 didn't do that. It does give you vague terms, but more vague on the mystical side, more towards myth and legend than actually saying, no, these are pertaining to the events, but we can still explain the events in a way that everybody is going to be able to understand it. And that's why in a lot of cases I like the Kingsglaive concept, that a lot of it is based around political intrigue and war. And it works. You get to see the war from different perspectives. You get to see it from the King's End, who is played by Sean Bean. Sean, I love you, but you need to stop playing characters that die. It really makes me feel bad. Because, I mean, the last 4 or 5 roles I've seen you in, you've died. Because you're Eddard Stark in Game of Thrones. You were in The Island, although, well, you didn't technically die there. National Treasure, you didn't die there either, but Boromir from Lord of the Rings, you died there. And here, well, it's a war, and there are casualties in war. And it's actually kind of expected now that if Sean Bean's playing the character, he dies. So I really wish that we didn't have to make that assumption. But you get to see it from the King's perspective. You get to see it from Luna Freya's perspective, who's now a captive of Niflheim and being auctioned off in order to appease this alliance. And then, most especially, you get to see it from Nyx's perspective. A orphan from another village who is now, he's got potential to be able to use magic and is therefore inducted into the Kingsglaive and has to make some choices that normally and logically he wouldn't have made. And now it's the only way out. So, but it sets up the events, I believe, for 15 beautifully, especially if 15 kicks off kind of where this moves on. So yeah, my final thoughts are I recommend it wholeheartedly. Final Fantasy fans, you guys will enjoy it. It does establish the world of 15 very, very well, and it is definitely something that you can look to for a little while before 15 comes out in November. And that's going to go ahead and do it for my vlog/review of Kingsglaive Final Fantasy XV. I hope you guys have enjoyed, and of course I will see you guys next time for the next video.